We're Laura and Cindy, and you're listening to the Holistic Horsemanship and Husbandry podcast, where we talk about natural horsekeeping and deepening your connection with your horse. I'm Laura, your horse care mentor. I teach natural horse management practices after working with over 200 horses and seeing how current industry standards are compromising the health of the horse.
And I'm Cindy, your horsemanship mentor, offering a proven and unique approach to creating deep connections with your horses from 20 plus years of experience, including working with wild Mustangs. If you enjoy this conversation, please leave us a 5-star review wherever you're listening to us so we can get this podcast into the ears of more passionate horse people.
Welcome back, everybody. We are super excited to have Karen Cox here as our guest following up our hoof health episode because she is a boot fitting expert with Scoot Boots and Equine Fusion Boots, and she's here to talk a little bit more about when to use boots, how to use boots effectively, and really how to support your barefoot horse. So welcome, Karen.
Hello, glad to be here.
So tell us a little bit about why you're such an advocate for a barefoot horse with boots versus shoes.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it has to do with the freedom that boots give you. You can trim as often as you like. You can trim however fits the horse best. You don't have to worry about fitting a shoe on that foot. So, for example, if a horse has long toes, low heel, sometimes the best thing to do for that horse is to trim it every 2 or 3 weeks rather than like a 6-week cycle. So by having boots, that gives you the freedom to have your farrier come every few weeks or, rasping between trims yourself. And that really helps flares and that kind of thing stay under control.
So Cindy, you just pulled off Rocky's shoes. How's he doing?
Yes, Rocky, for those of you who don't know, and Karen, he's new to you as well. He is a 9-year-old Gypsy Vanner quarter horse who joined our herd in May. He came from Southern California and was a mounted police officer's horse. And so he came with shoes just on his front feet. And he's got the lighter colored hoofs. He doesn't have the dark hoofs. And my farrier and I both think he has really healthy looking feet. And all my horses, I prefer to have my horses barefoot if they can be, but we live on a very rocky area and a lot of the riding I do is rocky terrain. So I kind of let them tell me what they need. So we just took his front shoes off. This would have been his second time for me to have him shod. And I'm like, do we really need to? And my farrier said, no, I think his feet look super healthy. So he was super ouchy. We're going on week 2, and he was super ouchy going from his sand pen down to the pastures on the rocky area. I mean, to the point where it was really painful. This week, he's doing better. He's still a little ouchy, but he's doing better. And yep, they're chipping up pretty good around the edges. But all in all, he seems like he's doing better. But I don't know if I should try boots on him or if I should just keep him going the way he's going.
Of course, I'm a boot rep, but there's, reasons I became a boot rep because I've gone through some of this same kind of thing. And in my view, if a horse is sore and you're trying to take that horse barefoot, I would always put him in boots at first. And the reason is, first of all, you don't want your horse being in pain. So that's one reason.
I'm assuming, Cindy, you haven't really been able to ride very much since that.
I purposely am not riding him. Yeah. I'm purposely letting him get comfortable in his semi-rocky pasture to toughen his feet up before I take him out in the mountains.
She had boots. She could probably slap those boots on and go riding, right?
Yes. Most likely you might need to add pads at first for a little extra cushioning. But the reason I like to get a horse in boots, like even if you're rehabbing a hoof and it's going to change shape and you're going to have to change boot sizes, I like to get them into boots right away if they're showing any soreness because it's going to affect the way they move and you don't want compensation issues happening. So in my view, you want that horse moving comfortably, even in the pasture. they will still toughen up their feet in boots, especially scoot boots because they're flexible. If they were still needed more protection than a scoot boot, then I'd probably put them in the Equine Fusions. But you can use boots for turnout, by the way. So by getting him in boots, he's going to move around more. He's going to move more evenly. He's not going to be affecting other parts of his body. So that would be my recommendation.
So when you're doing that transition, what does it typically look like? Like, I'm assuming there's some kind of process of weaning out of the boots. How do you make those calls?
Yeah, my goal is always to get the horse out of boots, at least for pasture. So a lot of horses, you might still need boots for riding, especially if your horse lives on soft ground and your rides are on rocky ground. In your case, you said you're living on rocky ground. So that can actually be easier because they're not, when they're standing around with nobody on their back and they're in grass, and then you take them out riding on rocks with weight on him, that's usually more of a problem than a horse that's living on rocks all the time. So yeah, but the process, I would just keep boots on as long as necessary, and then, take them off, see how he does. If he still needs them longer, put them back on, and just kind of keep going like that. But I would say it's not just about shoes versus boots or barefoot versus boots. To me, there's 4 things that are really important when pulling shoes. You don't just pull shoes and that's it. That's the process. I think you want to make sure there's good diet. And I'm not a nutritionist, so I'm not going to get too into that. But I mean, some basics are avoid sugar. You want to avoid sugar. And you want to avoid too much iron. For my horses, they're on hay. They get a little beet pulp and they get a basic mineral. That's it. So, and beyond that, you could talk to a nutritionist if you feel like there's other issues. So diet, environment, that to me is not standing around in mud all day. Pea gravel is really good, stimulates their feet, keeps their feet pretty clean. Keep a clean paddock if they're in a paddock, or ideally they're turned out if they can be. Some horses you've got to watch green grass and all that. So, but if a horse can get turned out on pasture, I think that's great because they get to move around a lot. And then third is to have a good trim. And another one, this seems kind of minor, but I would say check for thrush and treat for that, because that's the cause of a lot of hoof pain that goes unrecognized even by some farriers. So that, and then boots for support if needed during the transition.
I want to go back to something you mentioned. Can a horse that's transitioning from shoes to barefoot grow those harder, tougher soles while wearing a boot?
I think growing harder, tougher, or in a lot of cases, the problem is really the sole thickness. Yeah. I think that's one of the most difficult things to do. I do think boots can help because they're going to cover the whole foot, and instead of constantly wearing that sole down, it's going to retain some more of the sole.
Okay.
So I had a very thin soled thoroughbred. This is back when I first started boots, but she was in shoes sometimes and boots sometimes, and both of them helped her hang on to that flaky sole for longer, which can help a thin-soled horse.
You're providing protection while you're allowing your nutritional changes and your movement changes and your heels to heel and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. If there's a way to grow sole faster, that's probably more a nutritional thing. The purpose of the boots and whatever you put on their feet is more to prevent wear, especially if you're on abrasive ground. So, and if I had a horse with 4 millimeter thin soles, extremely thin, like I could push them with my thumb and flex them. Yeah. I didn't want her wearing any sole, so I had her, I wouldn't walk across the driveway without something on her feet. So, but it was about preventing wear. I've never cracked the code on like how to actually grow thicker sole. There would be other people I could put you with that could talk to you about that.
But I mean, it's just hooves and nutrition are slow changes.
Yeah, it takes a year to grow out a new hoof, typically about a year. So, if you see flares and they're halfway down the foot and you start doing the right things at that point, you've got another 6 months before that flare is going to be gone.
Let's pause for a moment. Have you ever looked at your horse and wondered if they're thriving in your care? Is there more you can do to give them the best life possible? Most ranches and boarding facilities are set up for convenience, not horse health, but there's tons you can do to fix your horse's situation if you're willing to get creative. Join Evidence-Based Horsekeeping, my Facebook group where members learn how to improve the mental and physical well-being of their horses. The link is in the show notes.
So one of the biggest challenges I've had, and many other people who are trying to transition to boots, trying to transition out of the shoes, but occasionally there's a hoof issue that they need to wear. They're barefoot, they need to wear a boot for whatever period, for that, 6 to 12-month healing, whatever the issue might be. The biggest complaint is finding a boot that won't fall off. And when you find a boot that won't fall off, it's harder than hell for some of us older women, yes, I'm aging myself, to get the boot on. So what's your solutions for those challenges?
Okay, so first, the boot's falling off. I will never guarantee that a boot will never fall off. If you use boots long enough, you're going to lose a boot. Well, no doubt. You're going to lose a boot. I'm a boot rep. I've lost a boot. So,
but I've lost them like every ride.
That's the thing. It should be extenuating circumstances where you lose a boot. Those boots should stay on good enough that you can go out and enjoy a ride. And like I get to the point where I forget to check on the boots. So if I do lose one, it's 10 miles back because I haven't checked on it. So that's the downside of having success with boots.
As soon as you relax, it's gone.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, but the key is a good fit. And also another key is if the hoof has flares and or long toe, low heel, high heels, all kinds of any kind of hoof conformation is going to affect how well that boot retains. And I know all sorts of tricks for compensating for that because, you don't always start out in the perfect place. So just for example, like mules have very upright feet. They're almost like soup cans. Picture putting a soup can in any kind of boot. It's just going to spin around. So if you have a horse with really high heels, the closer it is to a soup can, the more issues you may have. Now we have new boots that we're actually using on mules now. So there's all kinds of ways around that, but it's always going to be more of a challenge. If you've got a horse with twisty landings, that's going to be more of a challenge. So, but the best way to mitigate all that is to work with a boot fitter, because if you just look at, like most boots have a sizing chart that you look at and you measure, and pretty much every boot you measure across the widest part of the hoof and you measure from toe to heel. Widest part of the hoof, that's easy. You just measure the widest part of the hoof. Toe to heel, well, the heel could be 1/4 to 1/2 inch different lengths front to back, that measurement, based on how the horse is trimmed. So that's one thing I've come to learn how to, do I measure to where I actually see the heel buttress, which is the last part of the heel that touches the ground, or do I measure where I think that buttress should be? Length is very subjective when it comes to trying to fit boots. And charts only measure length and width. There's heel bulb size, there's angles, does the horse have flares, whatever other issues. All these things affect boot fit. But when you're looking at charts, you're only looking at 2 dimensions, length and width. And that's just not enough. So what I do is I do look at the measurements, but then I send 3 or 4 sizes to try on, walk around in them, look at how do they fit heel bulbs, how do they fit length and width, how do they fit at the toe, and all that stuff. So that's why I always, even as I have fit thousands of pairs of boots, I don't even go by charts. So it's no wonder that when people have done it, never, they go by charts and their boots are falling off.
So I just want to come back. That was the boots that keep falling off. And I'm going to ask this question before we move on too farther because you said this, but I'm sure we're going to circle back. You said you'll send multiple sizes of boots. So when you say get with a boot fitter and you and I are in different states, you can still work with me?
Absolutely. Yeah. I do 99% remote fitting because, I've fit thousands of horses, almost all of them remote. they're whoever's in my town of Bozeman, Montana, they'll, I I kind of stopped doing on-site fittings even for horses here, unless it's someone that's really struggling, because I find that when people do it themselves, they become more self-sufficient. They really learn how that boot should fit, and we have fewer issues going forward. So for example, I might send a boot that fits perfectly, but then someone goes 10 weeks without getting a trim, they put the boots on and then they get rubs. Well, if they were the ones fitting them to begin with, it's really on their mind or your mind how that boot should fit. And that's something you always need to be checking, because hooves can change with the weather, with diet, anything. Hooves can just change at any time, the trim. So I find that my customers that do the remote fittings actually have more success than when I go and do the fit. Plus they're less high maintenance for me.
Yeah, I mean, it's been maybe 3 years, maybe longer since I did a fitting with Karen. I can see, like, I have a friend who has terrible problems with her scoop boots because she just did the width and length and ordered online, and she's actually using the neoprene inserts that I bought from you. I didn't end up needing them. She's wearing them.
Right.
They help a little bit, but I can see her boots and just see that, like, they're just not the right fit.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah,
she
almost
constantly
always they're too big when owners fit them.
yeah, and they twist
why,
constantly. And
yeah.
my husband hikes with us a lot, so he and this horse have this lovely little relationship where every time Rain Man's boot twists, Quinn picks it up and fixes it.
Right. Yeah. Yep. And I mean, I always stress to my customers too, you are part of the fitting team. It doesn't end when I send you those boots. You always have to be monitoring, always making sure they're not too tight or too loose. And I welcome any of my customers. I'd rather have you ask me questions and make sure and send me another video of the fit to make sure we get it right. And sometimes, I deal with scoop boots and equine fusions. Sometimes neither one will work and you need to do a different boot, and I'm happy to send someone to whatever boot is going to work. So like Laura, you and I struggled. I don't remember exactly what the struggles were, but I know we had some struggles.
Landings on the hind, and we're going to need to dive back into that this winter. So
you guys keep saying this phrase for those of us that don't know what that means. Twisty landings, is that what you're saying?
Yep. So it's common. It's probably more common in gaited horses, but any horse can have it. And one of my customers calls it mashing taters.
Okay, now I got the visual.
It's when the horse lands and then they twist their foot. And with this kind of horse, like if someone tells me my horse used to wear his shoes down to razor blades in front of the shoe by the end of 6 weeks, that's a mash and taters horse. He's just drilling a hole of china every time he sets his foot down. It's, when you think of it that way, it's probably kind of obvious like why that can create challenges. And there are things we can do. There's extra straps we add, and maybe we do a different kind of boot. So it's really case by case basis. Fitting, I spend a lot of time on every fitting I do.
So it's kind of like they're stepping in as if you were twisting a lid off of a of a jar, that kind of an action. And is that more common in the, I think I know the answer to this, but I want to ask anyway. Is that more common in the front or the back, or
probably back? Gaited, a lot of gaited horses will do it in the front too. So but and sometimes you can tell by looking at the feet. Like I'll see the foot and I'll be like, does your horse have twisty landings? Because they'll have like wear in one spot a lot more than another, or like one part of the toe is kind of shooting out. And sometimes that could just mean the horse is walking, his legs are like either toes out or toes in or something, but it can also mean the horse is twisting as they land.
Yeah, no, I've followed behind many twisty horses on the trail. Now that we know now that we have a name for it, as well as some of the horses I've worked with in training, I've noticed that some are super dramatic, and some are not so much.
And they'll have trouble keeping shoes on too. So they're just, that's probably the biggest challenge, is that issue.
Interesting.
And for our listeners, if it's in the hind, you can really see it in their hocks. Like their hocks are twisting out
Yep.
when they're walking. If you're wondering if your horse has it, just have somebody walk your horse away from you.
Yep.
It's really easy to spot. MJ has it when we now know she has bone spurs in her spine, and I think it's a compensation thing of when she's really out of shape, it shows up really big, and then when she's
Yep.
in shape, it goes away.
Yeah. Yeah, and I don't know if it's always a compensation issue or it's just can be normal. I really don't know, but I would always look for, like, whenever you see a horse landing funny or anything like weird boot issues, I would always just at least examine, is there something going on higher up causing that?
Good advice. So what about the boots that are really hard to get on?
Yeah. Yeah.
I've had some, I haven't used boots for years, but when I did use them, I think the ones I settled on, and we're talking over 10 years ago, were the easy boots, easy glove, I think is what they were called. And those fit the best. They didn't have the wearing, they were easier to get on. But even then, sometimes they were hard to get on and hard to get off. And I had the distributors tell me, well, that's what makes them a good fit.
Yeah, so for easy boot gloves in particular, the part of the instructions are you should have a rubber mallet to pound them on. So that tells you something right there. And not all horses want to deal with that. Not all people want to deal with it. A lot of endurance riders use that boot just because they don't want to be stopping in the middle of 25 miles when they're tired and trying to deal with boots. They do tend to stay on well for a lot of horses. And I would say it's subjective too. A lot of people tell me scoot boots are super easy. Some people say they're hard to put on. So that's the other reason I like to send the fitting boots out. So you can actually try them and see them before you buy them, and you'll know whether they're hard or not. Scoot boots are typically pretty easy to put on. Some people struggle with the front straps a little bit, and we do have tricks like using a hoof pick and to hook on the front straps. So that's just something we can work through. And if you find one kind of boot hard, we can look at another kind. I would say none of them are like crazy easy, like just put the boot down, the horse puts it on, or although I did have a horse do that once.
Well, that's something that I do with MJ is I get her in there and then I just have her use her weight to step into the boot. So I don't have to force my hands on it. And that comes with its own challenges because sometimes when I'm trimming her, she stomps on the ground because we're trained to do that. So, like a balancing act of having to redo that communication and say, though, that's not what I want from you in this situation. But I think using your horses to help you get the boot on instead of like just having this limp noodle that you're struggling against is very helpful.
Yeah.
I've always kind of looked at dealing with boots on horses like dealing with 1-year-olds and shoes.
Well, it could be, but to me, that's actually like I go and I don't do a lot of trims anymore, but on emergency cases, I'll go do and trim for someone, or even like if I do in-person fittings. And I'm really proud of my horses because my horses are some of the best feet picker-uppers of any horse I've ever worked with. And when I find another horse like that, I'm like, oh, such a pleasure. Like by using boots, you're at least every time you ride, you're picking up the foot, you're cleaning out the foot, you're examining things. The horse is just getting their feet picked up all the time. If you're doing your own trims, even more so. So I just think if you're struggling to get boots on because of your horse being heavy in your hand or shimmying around or whatever, that's just something, to me, that's just part of horsemanship that you want to work with. And your farrier will love you for it, because I can tell you from trimming horses, it is, even a horse that just wiggles a little, it is 5 times harder on your body than a horse that will pick up his foot nicely. And farriers have a lot of body issues. They all see masseuses, and it's just a really, really lot of wear and tear on your body. So I like to advocate for getting your horse to pick up their feet nicely, just for the sake of your farrier and yourself, if nothing else. The other thing that's kind of funny is it's not like when you put booties on a dog and the dog's walking out around like a wacko. Most horses, you put the boots on and they're just like, oh, that feels pretty good, especially if they're sore. you can visibly see them like relax and sigh and maybe yawn when they get those boots on if it's a sore horse. Sometimes on the backs they'll be a little like kicking out a little or wiggling around a little, but I can think of maybe one exception where I walk that horse a few steps and then they're fine. I think that most of them appreciate the boots.
What are the difference between you work with two scoop boots
Yep.
and Equine Fusion? Is that what you were calling
Yep.
the other one? So
Mm-hmm.
tell us, what are the difference between the two and why would you pick one over the other?
Yeah, so I would call the scoop boot more of the sport model, like the sports car. They're very low profile, they're very sleek. They drain, water drains out of them easily, pebbles, they're very open, so stuff doesn't get stuck in them. They have a flexible sole, so their endurance horses love them. Any horse that's doing any kind, like even some barrel racers are using them. Things where you don't want the boot being too much weight and interfering with gait. Icelandics, I fit a lot of Icelandics. They have this gait called the tolt that's extremely fast moving feet. And they like the scoop boots. Horses that overreach. We have little short backed Arabs, and when we got them, both of them were knocking off all their other boots because they were stepping on them with the back feet. Now that can also be a trim issue, and it partly was. These horses didn't have hoof care before. But we switched to scoop boots, and because they're so sleek, the hoof just slides off. So if those are your priorities, then I always look at scoop boots first. However, the soles are more flexible and thinner. So if I see a horse that can barely walk across his little paddock, I probably won't be doing scoop boots. I'll probably be doing Equine Fusion. The soles are a little thicker, a little cushier. There's more room for padding inside. Or if I have, sometimes for horses with twisty landings on back or little round feet on back, for example, my husband's horse, I could not get scoop boots to work on her back feet. We're doing Equine Fusions on her back, and she's doing great in those. So, and they're not really bulky or heavy, but they're just not as low profile as scoop boots. So for the enclosed boot, the Equine Fusions are some of the lighter boots that you can get.
So you don't worry about doing one brand on the front, one band on the back?
Nope. I mean, even though the sole thickness is a little different, if the horse was standing on a basketball court perfectly flat 24/7, then I would probably worry about that, like body
It's like
issues.
Nature is way more variable than that shoe.
Yeah, exactly. Your horse is never standing on perfectly flat ground. One foot's in a hole, the other foot's on a mound of dirt. So yeah, that's not, some people obsess over that. I don't.
That's a great analogy. I like that. Standing on a basketball court versus standing where they live.
Yeah.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah. Yeah. My horses, we're on a mountain. Our pasture, there's the only flat space that we've created with brute force. So our horses are mostly standing uneven all day long.
We haven't talked about the shims in the scoots, which I think are really helpful. Karen, you helped me with the shims because at the time that you fitted my boots, my farrier just wouldn't come on a shorter trim cycle, and so I was having a huge variation in hoof size, and that was causing some challenges. Now I trim MJ myself like every 2 weeks or so. I never take the shims out, and the boots work great, and I don't have a problem. Are the sizes dialed in enough where I would size down now?
That's possible. I kind of see shims as about a half a size difference. Size 1 was too tight and size 2 was too loose. You could put a shim, and just to explain a shim, it's just like a rubber thing that fits across the front of the boot, inside the front of the boot. It just takes up a little space. For example, let's say I always recommend 6 weeks max between trims. Otherwise, you start getting flares and all kinds of other issues. So let's say you could only get 8-week trims and you're pregnant and you can't do any rasping in between. What you could do is get a little bit bigger boot than you normally would, put the shim in the front for the first half of the trim cycle and take the shim out for the second half. So, and yeah, it's just a really good tool that can help through stuff like that. I don't totally love them because I like the toe as far to the front of the boot as possible for better breakover. And for anyone that might not know, breakover is like the point where the horse's hoof starts leaving the ground. Just picture, like, I always call a long-toed horse, like the toes are way too long. It's like walking in clown shoes, and you have to walk funny to pick up your feet. So, I mean, shims, it's a very slight difference. That's a
Yeah,
very
that's the back on the
exaggerated
basketball court, I
example.
think.
Yeah, yeah. So, if you were able to do, 4 to 6 week trims and you didn't need shims, all the better. But if you can't do that, I mean, we have to deal with reality of life. And shims are a great tool for that in between.
Ready to unlock true freedom with your horse? Join Unbridled Freedom, our private Facebook group for women on a spiritual journey in horsemanship. We don't fix our horses, we transform ourselves. This is your space to embrace challenges, celebrate victories, and deepen your bond with your horse. If you're ready to lead with wisdom, compassion, and inner peace, join us today. Let's dance with our horses as one. The link is in the show notes below. So how does somebody start working with you?
First thing is, I would send them a link on my website, which is timberlinetack.com.
So
and
we'll
there's
we'll put that in the show notes.
Yeah. Okay. And yeah, there's a banner at the top. You just click that banner, it takes you to the instructions. But basically the process is you send me 4 photos of each hoof. And I do like to get both hooves. And if we're fitting backs, send the backs too. So you're going to do length from toe to heel. You're going to show me a picture of the ruler on the hoof.
This is my favorite part, because I'm so worried about reading the ruler wrong. And when I found out that Karen was going to read it for me, I was like, this is amazing.
Yep. And it's really, like I was saying before, it's really important for length, because depending on how that horse is trimmed could greatly change the length. And I think that's why a lot of times people think the charts are wrong. It's not that the charts are wrong, it's that they're not measuring everything we need to know. So that's why I do the toe to heel, width at the widest point, and a front view, no measurements, just to put the camera on the ground in front of the hoof, take a picture, and then side view. Camera on the ground, side of the hoof, take a picture. The side picture helps me see, that's more important than the front picture. It helps me see heel height, hoof angles, underrun heels, long toe loop, all that kind of stuff, flares, chips.
So is there ever a point when you're going to suggest that somebody addresses some severe issues in that hoof with their farrier before getting into the boots?
Yes. Actually, before I get to that, just to add the next step. So first step, to send me photos. Second step is I look at those photos, I pick out 3-4 sizes, send them to you to try on. Single boots, they're just for trying on. They're not trial boots, they're fitting boots. We try those on, you send me videos, and I look at certain things and help you pick the size. Then I ship your new boots, and you get to trial those for 2 weeks and ride in them and do whatever you want. So yeah, but anyway, yes. So your question about, do I ever get someone sending me photos of a horse and there's issues, kind of like, do I bring that up, or that's the kind of question, or what do I do? Yeah. So that can require a lot of diplomacy, because the last thing farriers tend to be set in their ways. Some of them are very highly trained, some aren't. Some have been doing it for 40 years and still, maybe in my view, aren't doing everything right. The last thing a farrier wants to hear is some keyboard warrior boot fitter telling the customer that the trim is all wrong or something. I never say the trim is all wrong. What I'll say is something like, it looks to me like you could maybe take the toes back a little bit because you're getting some flare or separated white line. Why don't you bring that up with your farrier the next time they come? Something like that. And sometimes it's really hard, because sometimes it is just a horrible trim. But usually it's just like little things that they might tweak. A lot of times it's just they're going too long between trim cycles. 10 weeks, 12 weeks. And a common thing I'll hear is, oh, my horse doesn't need, even my farrier might say, or I think my horse doesn't need to be trimmed every 6 weeks. He wears his own feet down. Well, they're always wearing their feet down. Otherwise their feet would be 5 feet tall, but they are probably going to be out of balance at that point and start getting separated white line. And yeah, so I do bring that up. I just have to be careful how I bring it up, because I don't want to get on the bad side of farriers. And I've seen farrier work getting better and better. I've seen owner trims getting better and better since 2018 when I started doing this. It's really amazing. I don't see too many really horrible feet anymore.
You know, at the time that you and I were fitting, I didn't have an eye for what I was looking at. And you very politely said that the heels were underrun. And I didn't know, I couldn't see it. And so I didn't know how to talk to my farrier about it. And then it was 2020 that I started studying hooves. And once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it.
Yeah.
And then it was like, oh, this hasn't been improved in 2 years. It's not going to be. So it's up to me to improve it.
It's probably the most common problem I see, by the way, is underrun.
Very rarely see a horse in a shoe that doesn't have them.
Yeah. And the second most common, or often goes with that, is contracted heels. And that could be a horse. There are horses and shoes without contracted heels. Like if you put a really good trim on a horse, you put shoes on them, you get those shoes off 6 weeks max, you give the horse some time off. They can be in shoes and not have contracted heels, but I would say in shod horses, contracted heels are the most common issue. And that's where you'll see the frog looks really pinched. Frog should be really robust. And a lot of shod horses will have that. And then you take the shoes off and I'll get a picture a week later and it looks different already.
Wow.
So I got an interesting conversation last night that I want to pose to you and let you respond, because you just said you're seeing better and better trims, healthier and healthier hooves, more and more educated humans. Yep. It was a spouse of a farrier that was feeling a little bit agitated at a conversation where people were taking on their own hoof care. And she said, you know, ever since people think they can just handle it with a rasp and a pair of scoop boots, horses' hooves have gone downhill and there's so many lameness problems. And I was going to just let this person have their feelings and their thoughts, but my response to it would be, actually, no, people are aware. They're not covering up problems with metal shoes, and they're willing to put in the work.
Well, and I would add to that, shod trims are getting better too.
That's good.
It's not just a bare, like I stay out of that whole barefoot versus shoes thing. I have no problem with someone using shoes. You want to have a good trim. You want, like I was saying before, you get those shoes off, give the horse a break. If that's what works for you. Some people don't want to deal with boots, and I'd rather see a horse in shoes than in ill-fitting boots that are causing rubs or aggravation because the boots are falling off left and right. Like, you know, if that's the way the boots are going to be, then put shoes on. It's not gonna, I don't think it's the healthiest, but it's not gonna wreck your horse if done right.
What I've seen a lot of over the last several years, because I had a farrier that I thought was doing a good job until we had a falling out over Mustangs. And we fired each other. And then I was recommended a farrier who has actually gone to a certified farrier school and has done competitions and goes to annual conferences and stays up on everything. And so what I want to add in closing is that there's a lot of farriers out there who are not properly trained. And therefore,
and barefoot trimmers too.
Yes. And so working on a horse's hoofs requires an education. And it's not just on how to use your tools, but it's the anatomy, it's the nutrition, it's the biomechanics. It's more than just let's trim their feet and we should put shoes on him because he doesn't seem to walk well on hard surface. So I agree. I think we're all on the same page here that in every industry, horse trainers, nutritionalists, boot specialists, farriers, there are the ones who take it seriously and get a very good education and they stay on top of their education.
That's staying on top of it. And to me, education can come in many forms. It could be shadowing a good farrier. It can be Facebook if you can weed through all the garbage to the good
Discernment.
stuff. Yeah, a discernment, exactly. I credit Facebook for this vast improvement in hooves. I really do. That might sound crazy, but people are in there talking about it, learning from each other. How else could you do that before? Like there's groups that talk only about this all day long, on and on and on. And even you might hear some junk and you might hear some good stuff. You go try it yourself, see what works. That's education too. If you can also go to some clinics with some great trimmers or rehabbers and stuff like that, that's also really valuable. But even owners, just from Facebook, I've seen improvements, and it just sparks the questions and just gets the dialogue going. And I think that's been a bit, but that way of learning is not for everyone, because
and I think you have to be able to follow your gut a little bit on what sounds right, and even sometimes in how it's being delivered. If somebody's really confident and knowledgeable, they're more likely to be less defensive about having a open dialogue debate about the conversation. But as horse owners, we owe it to our horses to be their voice and be their advocates. And whenever we're in doubt about anything, find a specialist in that field. So,
and Karen, I would say always be learning. Always be learning. And that's what I'd look for in a farrier too, or a hoof care practitioner. If someone's very closed-minded, even if they have a lot of experience, I'd be a little hesitant there. I want someone who's always reading, learning, going to clinics, however they choose to learn, as long as they're open-minded.
Because as we know, it's an ever-evolving field, always learning more about the horses and their needs. And as the environment changes and nutrition, there's a lot of good things coming out nutrition-wise, and there's a lot of crap. And you have to be able to understand. And like Karen started off in this conversation, they don't need sugar. No. Horses nor humans really need sugar, except for maybe in our electrolytes. So it was awesome talking with you, Karen. I'm definitely going to be sending you some pictures and getting your thoughts on my big Gypsy Vanner quarter horse.
Okay.
And
good.
We will put all of your information in the show notes for our listeners to be able to get in touch with you.
All right. Sounds good. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you. So if you have any questions about the topics covered in this episode, send us a message on our Facebook page, Holistic Horsemanship and Husbandry, and we will answer your question in a post on our page. You will be anonymous. We'll just take the question and provide our input, and we want to do it on the post so that we can all learn and grow together, because nobody knows everything. Thank you for tuning in to another episode. We want to remind you that we'll be here every second and fourth Tuesday of the month, following the golden rule. Have a plan, but always be willing to be flexible. Don't forget to connect with us using the links in the show notes below.
If you learned something new today, had an aha, or walked away with a valuable nugget, you can say thanks by leaving us a 5-star review on whatever platform you're listening on.